See, I grew up thinking it was on me. And because I was a failure at keeping the promises that I was making to Jesus, and because I was not consistent in my walk, because I wasn't having my devotions well enough, because I didn't witness to every person on every airplane that I sat next to, I thought God was ticked off at me. And what I needed to know was His grace really was for me. And it wasn't what I did. Because every time there was an altar call, I would go run into the front because I thought God was mad at me. And I thought that free salvation everybody talked about wasn't really free. It was free for a little while. It was actually on loan. And it was free for a little while, and then it was mine to start earning by how good I was, and how faithful I was, and how devoted I was to Jesus. And you know, it's a big lie. And that statement alone has some of you thinking, nah, he's gone too far. But see, God's grace is enough. His grace is enough. And there's nothing that you and I can add to it. But so often we look to ourselves and we ask, how am I doing? And we get involved in these accountability groups. Sometimes, at church we have these accountability groups where we meet, once a week, and we kind of help pluck each other's sins out of our lives. And grace is not about sin management. Grace is about trusting in the finished work of Jesus Christ. But we often look at how we're doing. And in Matthew chapter 14, after Jesus had got done feeding the 5,000 people, he told his disciples to go get out in the boat and get out of there. He was going to go be off by himself. So they're out in the boat, and then a storm came up. And the wind is blowing, the waves are high, and they look out from the boat, and there is Jesus. And he is walking on the water. And so Peter, cocky, arrogant Peter, thinks, I want some of that. And so he says, Lord, if you say come, I'll walk out there. And Jesus said, come on. And so Peter steps out of the boat, and this is, by the way, this really happened. And he starts walking on the water. And everybody's blown away because it's not just Jesus, but Peter is walking on the water. And it's going great. And he's looking at Jesus, and his eyes are fixed on Jesus, and he's walking on the water. And then Peter looks down to see how he's doing. And he sinks right down. He wondered, am I doing this right? Am I taking the right steps? Rather than keeping his eyes fixed on the one who had called him, he was looking down to see how he was doing. And that's when Peter sank. And see, there's something there for you and me, guys. And it's so easy for us to get caught up in these personal inventories and how am I doing? Am I improving enough? And am I faithful enough? Am I devoted enough? I have bad news for you if you're living with that kind of thinking. You never will be. This idea of being a fully devoted follower of Christ, you won't be because of sin. And it was for sin that Jesus died. And he didn't just die. The gospel is not just to save us, by the way. I love the gospel. If you follow me on Facebook, you see the gospel all over the place. Because it's not just the gospel that saves me, it's the gospel that transforms me. And the reason I talk about grace so much is that I'm betting my life on it. Those are the words of Bono, and they're mine too. And I'm trusting in the finished work of Jesus, and everything has changed. In fact, we were talking about this at lunch over at WayFM the other day. I have never been more excited about serving God with my life than I am right now. And it isn't because I have to, because Jesus paid it all. I get to. When I was in Indonesia and I was looking at these kids and I was seeing the work of compassion and the local churches there, I was moved. And my desire to serve God was even greater. And it wasn't because somebody had a spiritual gun to my head. It was because I am so amazed by what Jesus has done for me. I have been so rocked by the gospel, so wrecked by what he did for me, that when I soak in it, and when it sinks in, it changes me. In fact, and some of you are going to shake your heads when I say this, I am not a Christian because I follow Jesus. I follow Jesus because I'm a Christian. Think about that for a second. If you think that your standing with God is about your following him, then what Jesus did for you wasn't enough. I follow him because I am overwhelmed by what he did for me. He invites me to believe the good news of the gospel and to receive it, and to be so overwhelmed by it that I follow him. Let me tell you what that looks like. I love this story, and if I've told it before here, just listen like you're hearing it for the first time. Once upon a time, there was a slave auction. And I don't know in what part of the world this was happening, but in the middle of town, this is like hundreds of years ago, in the middle of this town, they built this big platform. And up on the platform, they brought these slaves, and they were auctioning the slaves off. And they had them lined up, and way over here were the big strapping slaves, and as they worked their way down, these were the small guys down here. By the way, I just looked back there. I don't look that good. That's Photoshop. So the slave auction is happening, and they start over here with the big, huge Arnold Schwarzenegger hard-working slave guys, and the biggest, most hard-working slave that day went for what would equate to $100 in today's economy. And back then, that was a lot of money. $100 for this big strapping slave. And so they keep going down the line, and finally they auction off the last one up on the platform, and everybody starts to walk away. And the auctioneer says, wait a minute, we still have one more slave. And they brought out this little girl who was about 12 years old. And she looked like she hadn't eaten in a couple of weeks. They had these big shackles and chains on her because they had them on all the slaves. And they brought her out, and she could barely walk out on the platform. Everybody just started laughing. I mean, nobody was going to bid on her. And the auctioneer said, look, we can't end the auction until we at least bring her out. So here she is. Who wants to bid on her? And everybody just kind of laughed, and some people started walking away. And from the very back of the crowd, this guy says, I'll give you $1,000 for her. And it got quiet, just like it did right here. And the auctioneer said, what? And he said, I'll give you $1,000 for her. And the auctioneer said, the auction is now over. And so this guy who bid $1,000 to purchase this 12-year-old girl who had been brought out, walked over to fork over the money, and he did, and then they brought the little girl over, and she had her chains on, and they gave the guy the key. And he took the key, and he undid her chains, and he said, you're free. And she said, don't mess with me. I'm a slave, and I'll do what I can, but that's kind of insulting to me. And he said, no, you don't get it. I bought you, and I'm setting you free. You have no obligation to me whatsoever. And he began to walk away. And she stood there, and she thought, wait a minute, this is not how it works. And she walked after him with her sick little legs, and she got to where he was, and she said, don't you get it? First of all, I don't get why you paid $1,000 for me. But I'm a slave, and you bought me, and I'll do the best I can for you, but you don't just get to set me free. And he said, yes, I do. I bought you at a great price, and I am setting you free. You are no longer obligated to me at all. And he began to walk away. And she stood there, and she started to get kind of mad. And she ran after him again, and she said, wait a minute. I'll do something, but you can't just set me free. And he said, yes, I can, and I did. And he walked away, and he got a long ways away. And she was just thinking about what had taken place. She was free. She was no longer a slave. Not to him and not to anybody. And then the most amazing thing happened. With her sick little legs, she ran as fast as her little legs would take her to where he was. And she said, okay, you tell me that I'm not a slave and that I'm free. But I want to serve you. And I want to serve you with my life, for my life. And he put his arm around her, and off they went. See, I'm not a Christian because I decide I'm going to follow Jesus. I follow Jesus because of what has been done for me. The Bible says that I have been set free, and so have you, because of what Jesus has done. And God invites you and I, who have been set free by the blood of his Son Jesus, to chase right after him and serve him, not because we have to, but because we get to be so overwhelmed by what he has done for us. To be so rocked and so wrecked by the good news that we're free, that we will go running after him. And we will say, Jesus, I get it. Thank you. And I want to serve you with my life. And see, it's hard for us to wrap ourselves around this good news of God's grace, because grace flies in the face of good old American thinking. Because in America, you work hard for what you get. And in God's economy, you don't do anything. You just receive what Jesus offers you.